This episode is brought to you by the Solo to Group Practice webinar. It's a free webinar that you can find at practiceoftherapy.com/group, and also brought to you by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 176 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer. Hope you're doing well and hope that you are having a good week or weekend whenever you might be listening to this. I know that as I'm recording this, I'm getting ready to start the weekend and looking outside, and it's just too pretty to be inside doing this, but I love doing this anyway. But I got to get outside because it's just a beautiful day. But anyway, glad for you to be with me. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome, and I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. So I'm glad for you too, and excited about this episode and actually the next two episodes. I've got some really special people with me, and it's turning out to work out pretty well with as far as the timing. As I've mentioned before, one of the things that I love doing is being part of mastermind groups. And the mastermind group that I'm currently in has got some special folks. I've got Whitney Owens, and I've got Jessica Tapana, and Uriah Guilford and myself get together regularly and just do mastermind stuff together and just talk about our practices and our businesses and our goals and that sort of thing. But this week, I've got my friend Uriah Guilford on the podcast. And if you don't know about Uriah, he's got a podcast called The Productive Therapist, and it is one that I just absolutely love. In fact, with Uriah, I just recently binge listened to several of his episodes, and I don't know if I've hit all of them yet, but I'm pretty close to it. But I think you're just going to love Uriah and just our conversation around productivity and just managing our time. I know in our mastermind group that we just recently had, that was one of the things that we were talking about with each other is how do you juggle several things? I know a lot of us, I know for me, I'm not only running a private practice, but also keeping up with another business, the practice of therapy, and then just juggling all I've got to juggle at home with my, as I've mentioned, my wife is disabled. And so just concerned about her care and doing all of those things. And I know for a lot of you out there, with kids in this past year, with COVID and having to do homeschool and just all of that, time just seems like there's never enough of it. And so in this episode, I'm going to be talking, you and Uriah and I talk about that and some of the things that some hacks that he has taught, and also talk about the mini course that he's got, and it's on getting control of your inbox. And so I'm excited for you to hear more about that. But before we get to my conversation with Uriah, one of the things I wanted to let you know about, some of the most common questions I get asked by my consulting clients and also listeners of the podcast is just around transitioning from solo practice to group practice and how to bring on other therapists and having your own group practice. And because leading and owning my own group practice has been such an important part of my own professional journey, I wanted to share a resource that I've created with my friend and fellow practice owner, Dr. David Hall over at Psych Maven. If you go over to practiceoftherapy.com/group, you can access a free automated webinar, and it's called Solo to Group Practice, Adding More Therapists to Grow Your Time and Income. And in this webinar, David and I share some of the most important lessons we've learned in our own journey as private practice owners. And we also give some practical tips and ways to challenge maybe your own self-doubt about starting a group practice. And also, we talk about some of the major pitfalls to avoid when launching a group. We've also included in the webinar just some time-limited bonuses and discounts that are exclusive for those who participate in the webinar. So wherever you are in your private practice journey, and if you'd like to access this free resource on considering group practice, please check out our automated webinar at practiceoftherapy.com/group. Again, that's practiceoftherapy.com/group. And speaking to today's theme of today's podcast episode, of just really being more productive, I'd love for you to go over and check out the sponsor for today's podcast, TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice and really couldn't do without them. And one of the things that is just so great about TherapyNotes is that it helps you to automate so much within your practice. They've got a patient portal where people can schedule themselves. They can also make payments. They can also do paperwork, all of that in a paperless environment, all within the platform of TherapyNotes. It also will send out insurance claims if you're insurance-based, and also send those important appointment reminders so that people show up for their appointments and that you know that they're coming. They've also got built into the platform a telemental health capability, so you can do everything right there with your clients if you're doing telehealth, and it's all right there. The TherapyNotes has consistently had a 4.9 star rating by its users, so a lot of people are using it. The other thing that you can do is if you're using another system, another EHR, they will transfer your records and help you with that process with no problem at all. So be sure and check them out, therapynotes.com. And if you'll use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, you can get 2 months of their services for free. So it's a win-win situation. You can check them out for 2 months. So be sure and check them out, therapynotes.com. And so, without further ado, here's my conversation with my good friend Uriah Guilford from the Productive Therapist podcast. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so excited to have Uriah Guilford with me. And Uriah and I have recently connected and are in a mastermind group together, which has just been great. And I'm really enjoying to get to know Uriah, and I knew I had to have him on the podcast. So welcome, Uriah.
Thanks, Gordon. I'm thrilled.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm going to say is that Uriah has one of the best podcasts out there, The Productive Therapist. And so I'm going to give a shout out here on the front end, and we're going to be talking some more about that. But Uriah, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about you and kind of how you've landed where you've landed in your own private practice?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. This is awesome. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Northern California, so just above San Francisco. And I've had a group practice here serving teens and families for about 6 years. And then about 4 years ago in 2017, I actually, as a result of being in a mastermind, actually, kind of interesting story, started Productive Therapist to kind of solve my own need for part-time administrative support, specifically in the intake coordinator role. And then after a little bit of time, I realized that a bunch of my therapist friends had similar needs, and it kind of spontaneously, a little organically grew into this legitimate, full-on virtual assistant business that's been an absolute blast to create, and is honestly one of my biggest passions right now. So that's the super short version.
Yeah. And then so as I mentioned, Uriah and I are in a mastermind group together, and we're really working hard to hold ourselves accountable for a lot of the stuff we're working on just within our practices, but also as consultants in this whole private practice consulting space. But one of the things that I know that I just get real excited about, and I was telling Uriah that I've been binge listening to his podcast here lately, but Uriah is one of those productivity gurus. I aspire to be that when I grow up, is to be a productivity guru. But Uriah has really whittled down some of the things that we deal with every day within our practices around productivity, particularly like email for one. And I know I would be embarrassed to show people my inbox right now, but one of the things that Uriah has put together is a I'll let Uriah tell about it because I'm gonna mess it up here. So Uriah, tell folks about that.
No worries.
Yeah.
I was just thinking as you were talking, I don't know if my interest in productivity is because I'm ambitious or it's because I'm lazy. It's one or the other, or maybe
right.
a little bit of both. But I like the idea of being as efficient as possible so that I can, get work done and then get back to life and having fun, those kind of things. So yeah, I am a huge technology nerd. So as well as productivity. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is email management. Because just between you and me, honestly, it's something that I constantly struggle with because I think like most of us, I get a ton of emails and I have this constant temptation to be just spending too much time in my inbox, and I can do it for most of the day and I can quote unquote waste time, right? Processing email because it feels very productive and it feels like I'm accomplishing things when I'm not actually getting the projects and the important things done. So I decided to create a 7-day challenge for honestly myself and for any therapists to help them sort of tame their inbox or, conquer email overwhelm, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you're talking about me again, because I know in listening to one of your podcasts, one of the things that with email is that it always feels urgent when it really isn't. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so true. I always think about email as somebody else's priorities for my day.
Yes. That's a
usually,
good way
right?
to put
Because
it.
over on my computer on the left, I've got my task list, like the priorities, the things that I need to do today. And then I open up my email and then all of a sudden I'm down 17 rabbit holes, and I'm calling my web host to solve a problem with my website. Oh man, there it goes.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. So why don't we dive into that a little bit? Just talking about productivity and just the email thing, and I've got some thoughts on that too. So yeah,
Sure.
tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm actually super interested to see what's inside of your Google Workspace course because I'm pretty interested in that. I think maximizing those tools that Google provides us is a huge benefit for all of us.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, one of the things that I'm taking my own advice, and it turns out it's pretty good, but I'm taking my own advice on this particular thing. And in my 7-day email transformation challenge, there's basically 7 days of tips that have pretty quick action steps. And on day 2, I talk about batching, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and maybe listeners are too. Just the simple idea of taking similar tasks, putting them together, doing them at the same time. So when you apply that to email, it means checking and processing email at certain times, but not throughout your day, not constantly. So one of the changes I've made just this week actually is to every night or whenever my workday is done, actually close my email so that when I get back to my computer the next day, I don't see it until I want to see it. And then I created a schedule to basically check and process email 3 times a day, like 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, something like that.
Right.
I haven't been perfect, but I can tell you that it's made a huge difference this week so far because I'm getting a lot more things done when I'm spending hours away from my inbox. Because I don't know about you, but when I see emails that need to be responded to, I have this urge to go do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Who doesn't, right?
Yeah. It's as a matter of fact, that happened just a few minutes ago for me. So I mean, it's just
Yeah.
So it's just a crazy kind of phenomenon. Yeah, the tackling your inbox is I I've gotten to the point where I probably get literally hundreds of emails every day, anywhere from newsletters and things that I'm subscribed to people in my practice, and then also with the practice of therapy. And it's really taken me a while to really get things down to where they're manageable. But there's one thing that I haven't quite gotten to, which is inbox zero. You want to talk about inbox zero and
Yeah.
what your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah. So I don't think that's the most important thing for everybody. And for anybody who doesn't know what inbox zero is, it basically means processing all your email to the point where there's there's zero emails in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I personally like to do that, and I have a few tricks to get there every day if I can. Although I'm not sure how much of it is just my control issues versus like actually, being productive. So I think focusing on the important things, whether your inbox has 0 emails or 200, responding to the important people, taking care of the things that are really top priority is, I think, the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I do personally, I don't know about you, but I personally love inbox zero. And one of the things that I use to do that is the snooze button in Gmail.
Yeah.
Do you use that?
I've started using it
Yeah.
because I learned about that from you, and
Oh,
so
right.
it's something that's been pretty cool.
So as I've been paying less attention to my email, I'm not actually processing everything every day, which is actually, it's hard for me to do that. But what I
Mm-hmm.
did last night, I was like, I'm done for the day. I've accomplished enough. And I literally checked the button to highlight all the emails that were in my inbox, click the snooze button, and I sent them to the next day at 8 o'clock. Like, you know what? I'm dealing with that tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a version of inbox zero,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really just kind of snoozing the things
Right.
that aren't urgent.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a I don't know about any of the other ones, but that's a feature within Gmail. I'll just say, as Uriah mentioned, I've got a course out there called Google Workspace for Therapists, and it's just recently reopened. And so when this particular episode comes out, the cart will be open for you to go take a look at that. But anyway, the thing about Gmail is it's got some of the most powerful tools for organizing of any email service that I'm aware of. I mean, as far as creating filters and having things just skip your inbox altogether. And so I've really been honing in on that. Again, another tip that I learned from Uriah and his podcast was what to do with all the newsletters that I get, because again, those are never urgent, but there's stuff that I might want to look at later. And so creating a filter so that if it contains the word unsubscribe somewhere in the email, it automatically goes to it gets labeled or tagged to go into another out of my inbox and into that folder, as I like to call it. Yeah.
Isn't that a good one? That's a good trick.
Yeah, it is. It is. When you think about productivity, Uriah, what are some of the things to get started with that? If a person is just feeling unorganized and maybe overwhelmed by, just either their practice or their life in general, what are some starting places that you see?
That's a great question. I always go back to the framework that I learned from Michael Hyatt, who's an author and a virtual business mentor. You heard of him? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually just reading his most recent book called Win at Work and Succeed at Life.
Yes.
In any case, he's got this great framework for productivity. He calls it the 3 keys of productivity, which are elimination, automation, and delegation. So I like to talk to people about that and just strategize around what they can remove from their calendar and their to-do list. Because we all have those things, right? That, especially as therapists, if we're connected with, Facebook communities or listening to these inspiring podcasts, we automatically add things that we think we need to be doing. So whatever you can eliminate from your schedule and from your to-do list, It's just going to help you free up your time and focus
Mm-hmm.
on important stuff. And then automate anything that you can happen, like we were talking about with the Gmail filters, for example, right? Things
Mm-hmm.
that you can cause to happen automatically, whether it's through your EHR software or through other tools. That's super, super helpful. And then the last one is my favorite, which is delegation, which kind of
Uh-huh.
ties into the virtual assistant support. But anything that you can get off your plate and have somebody else take care of for you is going to immediately free up your time and help you be more productive.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the framework that I like to think about productivity through.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't think that productivity is about working more or
Mm-hmm.
necessarily getting more done. It's just about using your time and your energy wisely.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. You mentioned just being able to delegate. And I know in just consulting that I do with other people, one of the first places that I think people tend to hold off on delegating is just really had their whole intake process of being of feeling like they've got to answer all of the calls and answer people's questions and do all the scheduling and that sort of thing. And that will absolutely wear you down, which is absolutely the first most important place to outsource in my opinion, where you're going to see an immediate return on your investment by outsourcing those kinds of things. And I know that's really kind of what one of your passions as well. And you started your whole company around that of finding virtual assistants. So yeah, you want to talk some more about that?
Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
what you're talking about there is, I think, one of the problems. I call it a problem of success, right? Because when you
Mm-hmm.
start a private practice, your goal is to, get X number of sessions and clients per week, and maybe you have a revenue goal, or you've got all kinds of things that you imagine. But what you don't know in the beginning is what it's going to feel like when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have that
Mm-hmm.
full private practice, or when you start and grow a group practice, you don't know what it's going to look like until you get into it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're talking about there is handling all those intake calls while trying to see your
Mm-hmm.
clients, while trying to update your QuickBooks, while trying to, do all the things that you need to do. It becomes overwhelming.
Right.
And despite what a lot of us think, we're not necessarily the best person to be talking to folks and matching them.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of therapists do a really good job of that. Obviously, that's what we do for a living, is we connect with people and we help them. But you can absolutely find a competent person, whether it's a virtual assistant or maybe somebody that you hire that comes into your office to take over that role and do as good of a job as you are doing, or maybe even better. So
Right. Right.
I like to tell this story that when I hired my first intake coordinator, I thought for sure, I think this is a common thought, but nobody can do this as good as me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for sure, his numbers are going to be lower, his conversion rates, if you will, right? The
Mm-hmm.
percentage of callers that become clients. And it was the exact opposite. His numbers were actually better. And
Mm-hmm.
he did a better job of matching people with my therapist than I could, because when I would talk to somebody on the phone, they would feel connected to me and want to work with me. And then it was harder for me to pass them off to another therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pleasantly surprised by that, and have never gone back to doing
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the one thing I've learned just with our virtual assistant in my own practice is that um, if you're busy seeing clients, that means there's going to be whole periods of time within your day at which the naturally your calls are going to go to voicemail and people are going to leave you messages. And so in the meantime, they're probably might be calling around to other counselors or therapists trying to find somebody to
Right.
get in. But since we've had an intake coordinator, that's their sole job, they're able to answer the phone, during regular business hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, as you said earlier, just has had a much higher conversion rate in terms of retaining clients and that sort of thing. And I just hired a new therapist and she's already full. And so,
That's great.
yeah. And so it's just, yeah, it's pretty, it's always a good return on your investment.
Mm-hmm.
If you're paying somebody $30 an hour or something like that to answer the phones for you, you're absolutely going to reap the benefit of that.
Definitely. How long did you wait until you brought somebody on for that role?
Well, way too long, probably, because, yeah. So it's interesting because I moved from in my own group practice. I started out with having contractors, and so I had everything routed. I had a phone system set up to where if you were going to set an appointment with that particular person, or just routed them to them directly. And so, but still, that was a problem of them getting a voicemail and not really answering things. And so, really, when it got to be, I think when I started getting overwhelmed with trying to juggle everything is the point at which I hired an assistant. And so, yeah, and that just made a huge difference.
Yeah. And you don't want to go back, do you?
No. Oh, absolutely not. In fact, I panic at the thought of my virtual assistant ever leaving me. So,
absolutely. I feel the same.
All right. So, So, what are some other things that you've been working on, Uriah, here lately?
Oh my goodness. Well, what have I been working on? The most recent was the 7-day email transformation challenge. So would love for people to check that out. And I'll give you a link so you can maybe put it in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's been pretty fun. Working on improving my podcast. And I'm also doing some hiring, and we're expanding our digital marketing services. So we help people with a number of things, virtual assistants that handle intake. The virtual assistants also handle like general administrative tasks. And then we also do some digital marketing, which has been a lot of fun. That's kind of another passion of mine. So we manage people's social media. We help them with blogs and podcasts. So basically content marketing. The newest one there is we're actually helping people edit and promote their podcasts.
Oh, wow.
Fun. That's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Yeah. That's again, just thinking about when I started this podcast, I was doing all of the editing and all of the recording and all of that sort of thing. And that was one place where I realized, okay, I've got to have somebody else do this, because Definitely. It was taking me, for a 30 to 40 minute podcast, it was taking me 4 hours to get it all pulled together and get the show notes and all of that. And so I've got my wonderful virtual assistant that does all of my podcast production, Rachel. So shout out to you, Rachel. I'm sure you hear this. Is that it has just been a huge lifesaver for me just to hear.
That's great.
Yeah.
Gordon, do you have a separate virtual assistant, one for intake and one for the podcast?
Yes, that really kind of keep the two parts of my business separate in that way. And it's it's just and things are the way things continue to grow. It's really I've got my practice, the practice of therapy under the umbrella of my private practice, but that's probably going to change this year. In fact, I'm going to have a meeting with my accountant about that here before too long. But so it's learning all this business stuff and just learning how to manage things in an effective way, and then just being able to juggle all the pieces has been been a challenge at times.
I can relate to that for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I actually I started Productive Therapist under the umbrella of my counseling corporation and kept it that way for the longest time, just because it was simple and easy. But then just January of this year, I split them off into two separate legal entities. So that so far has been a bit more work, I'll be honest, of course, but definitely worth it. So they both, kind of exist on their own and have their own, profit and loss statements and all that good stuff.
Right.
That was a good move. Good move for me so far.
Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of productivity, I'm curious to find out from you. One of the things that I learned along the way, not only from Michael Hyatt, which, by the way, I use the Full Focus Planner. I don't think good. I don't know that we've actually shared that in our mastermind group, but I love my planner. But one of the things that I learned, and this was probably from David Allen, the book Getting Things Done, which is another one that I would highly recommend. Although I was talking with someone this past week, they were were reading. It was a client of mine actually, and they were reading the book, and they were just talking about how overwhelming it was. And I'd say it's a good book, and I love the GTD system. But I think the Michael Hyatt system's a little more easy to navigate. And he's got another book. As a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to listen to this newest book, When at Work, what is it called again?
Win at Work and Succeed at Life.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was it. And I will have links again in the show notes to all of that. But another one that he's got out is called Free to Focus, and then The Best Year Ever. But anyway, where I was going with this before I get too far on a tangent is just the importance of being able to capture things as they come in, because we're constantly, email is a classic example of that, but there's other things that get handed to us along the way that we want to attend to. What are you finding is a good way to kind of capture things as you move through your day and through your weeks and that sort of thing?
That's an excellent question. So I recently got introduced to this term, this acronym PKM, which stands for Personal Knowledge Management, which basically encompasses how we take in and collect and sort of collate and access all kinds of information. If you just think about, as a therapist, all of these CEUs that we go through and the trainings and all the information that we collect over time, it becomes hard to organize it and find it when you need it. So I've been actually using Evernote, which probably a lot of people have heard of. It's been around for a long time. And I use that for basically everything. So whenever I have ideas, I literally have like 8,000 documents in there. But the nice thing is that a lot of them are tagged. They're easily searchable. And so, and I use that to track my goals. And it's basically my second brain is what I call it. So anything that comes in that I need to capture, that's not if it's a to-do, right? I put it in my to-do manager, my task manager. But if it's anything else, I pop it into Evernote, and that's where it lives, including files, including all kinds of links and anything you can imagine.
Right. Yeah. And I used Evernote for a long time too, but I've switched over to Google Keep, and it's very similar. Evernote is a little more hefty in that it's got, I think, a better way of just kind of sending things to people and being able to create notebooks and all of that sort of thing, which I think is if you've got a lot of stuff. And so I'm kind of using both. But when you mention your task manager, what are you using for that?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of an app called Todoist. And it, like most of them, it synchronizes, syncs to all platforms. And it's really simple to use, but it's also very feature rich. And so it can do just about anything you want to. I use that actually with my team too. So in order to delegate things to my my podcast editor or my virtual assistant or various different people on my team. So we have, shared projects within that. So that works really well. How about you?
Yeah, I've been using Trello is one. Another one that I've gotten recently familiar with through my friend Daniel Fava, and we did a redesign of my practice website, and we used Asana and for that, and that was a very good one as well. I think there's some others. There's one called Basecamp, which is really more of a communication kind of thing, but you can do projects and that sort of thing. But I think it's sometimes like
so
I get a bit nerdy over that, and just not
for sure.
I can get kind of blinded by the lights very easily.
I think it's important. When we're talking about productivity, to just use tools that work for you.
Right.
And don't change them. If you can help it, don't change them unless you really need to. It can be tempting to do that, especially sounds like for people like you and I. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be nice if Google Tasks was actually a good app.
Yeah. It would.
It's really not.
It really doesn't have that much stuff to it. So
no.
Yeah. So that would be. But well, Uriah, I want to be respectful of your time, and I know people are just going to love this episode. But tell folks a little more about how they can get in touch with you, and also the challenge
Mhm.
the inbox challenge that you've got going, and how they can find that.
Definitely. So everything that we do is over on productivetherapist.com, including the podcast, including the blog. We've got a number of online courses. We've got a really cool membership program that gives people access to all of our courses and some other fun things. So you can take a look at that there, including the 7-day email transformation challenge, which you can find in the show notes, hopefully too.
Yes,
And I would love for
absolutely.
people to check that out. And I just think the important thing to me is that we focus on our work, help our clients, and then get back to enjoying our lives and have some nice balance between the two.
Right, right. And Uriah is correct. There'll be links here in the show notes and the show summary to most all the things we talked about here on this episode. So, Uriah, I know you and I are getting together again next week and for our focus group. And
Yes.
one of the things are actually mastermind group. I call them focus groups as well. But one thing I would mention to folks just along those lines and just talking about being productive, I think seek out ways to get some mentoring and find groups that you can be with, like a mastermind group or a focus group, because it has absolutely not only enriched my life, but also has caused me to be more productive and actually move the needle forward. It's always worth the time that I spend in a mastermind group.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, Uriah, I'm sure we'll be back. I'll have you back on again. So thanks again for joining me. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Uriah as much as I did. It was just, it's always great to connect with him. And I love what he is doing just around productivity and really focusing in on that with us in our practices, because as a lot of us figure out along the way, it's getting busy is good, but then you've got to manage the busyness of things. I mean, having a full practice creates a whole other level of stress, going from very few clients, which is stressful in and of itself, to a full practice. Again, it's a whole different level of stress. And Uriah's got some great stuff, and I'd encourage you to go over and check it out. And you can find him at theproductivetherapist.com. And of course, there are links here in the show summary and show notes to be able to hook up with Uriah and find out about those things that he's offered. So, wow, that was a great episode. I went back and listened to it, and again, just really enjoyed it. And I'll probably listen to it again because Uriah is just full of a lot of wisdom with that. So be sure and check out the Solo to Group Practice webinar. It's a free webinar, and you can get to that at practiceoftherapy.com/group. And be sure and check that out. It's there for you, and you get to schedule the time that you watch it. And so it's really a good thing. So it's all automated, but I would invite you to go over and check that out, especially if you're thinking about starting a group practice or going from solo to group, but also for those folks that might be just getting started with group practice. I think there'll be some valuable information for you there. And also, as always, be sure and check out our sponsor for the podcast, TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. And they are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers in private practice. They're who I use in my practice, and they have some of the highest ratings of any electronic health record system out there. So be sure and check them out. TherapyNotes.com, and use the coupon code or promo code Gordon, just GORDON, and you can get 2 months of their services at no cost. So that is a pretty big deal right there. So be sure and check them out. And so, again, thanks for joining me for this particular episode. Do take time to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, whether it be on Apple Podcasts or in Google Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify, Amazon Music. any of those places, you should be able to find us. And subscribe and leave us a review. I love getting feedback and also a rating. So be sure and do that if you will. So thanks again, folks. Oh, and just here before we close, be sure and listen to the next 2 episodes because, again, you're getting to hear from some of my inner circle peeps. Whitney Owens and Jessica Tapana are going to join me. And once you hear the rest of the 2 of them, you'll see why I love my mastermind group so much. So be sure and check them out. So take care, folks. Have a great rest of your week or weekend whenever you might be listening to this. And we'll talk to you again next week. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.